Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Cobbs Corner. I'm your host, Morgan Cobbs. In today's episode, we're going to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Vol.2. This film saw the return of the Guardians as they meet Peter Quill's dad, a celestial named Ego. Peter, finally meeting his father, takes a turn for the worst after a disappointing revelation. Stay tuned. The film opens with a flashback sequence to the year 1980. You see Meredith Quill riding in a car with Peter's father, Ego, played by Kurt Russell. They sing along to the song Brandy, You're a Fine Girl by Looking Glass, a song about a sailor who wants to settle down but knows that his place is out exploring the seas. The song is a foreshadowing of the coming events. The two stop at a Dairy Queen where Ego places a cosmic plant in the forest behind Dairy Queen and tells Meredith how one day all of Missouri, all of Earth in fact, will be covered with him. We then cut to 34 years later to the year 2014, which is the year that this movie takes place, although the movie did come out in the year 2017. So this movie takes place the same year as Volume 1. The Guardians have been tasked with protecting Annulax batteries owned by an alien race known as the Sovereign from an interdimensional beast. While the Guardians are fighting off the beast, Baby Groot is dancing to Electric Light Orchestra's Mr. Blue Sky as the opening credits roll. Director James Gunn himself did the motion capture for Baby Groot's dancing in this opening scene. Drax still disapproves of Baby Groot dancing, and Groot has to freeze every time that Drax gets close to him, and we even see Drax during the battle gets thrown into the speaker system that Rocket had set up, so Groot and Drax are kind of just at each other's throats the whole film. The team defeats the Beast and then goes before the Sovereign. The Sovereign leader, Aisha, notices that Quill is not 100% human and disproves of his mixed genetic makeup, claiming that it is inorganic, and she says how every member of the Sovereign is made perfectly. Just then, Rocket takes a shot at Aisha, and the team walks away, but not before receiving Nebula, Gamora's adopted sister, as payment. Rocket reveals to Drax that he has stolen some of their batteries as the team walks off. The plan is to deliver Nebula to Xandar and collect the bounty on her head. Just as they are en route to Xandar with Nebula, they are stopped by a squadron of Sovereign ships, remotely piloted. Drax reveals how Rocket stole their Annulax batteries, which Drax calls Harbulary batteries for some reason. Drax just the comic relief in this film. As Quill and Rocket fight over who has control over the ship, they enter a quantum asteroid field, which is an asteroid field in which the asteroids appear and disappear randomly. After navigating the asteroid field, they are met by all of the Sovereign ships which flew around the asteroid field, and just when it seems like all hope is lost, the team is saved by what appears to be a man riding on top of an egg-shaped ship. The team crash lands on the forest planet Bearheart after flying through a hexagonal jump point, where they are met by Ego, who reveals himself to be Peter's dad. Just a quick side note, and I guess world building, the hexagonal jump points, that's essentially how people travel from one planet to the next, and how travel happens throughout the MCU is through these jump points in space. Ego has dinner with the team, and they discuss how Yondu kept Peter instead of delivering him to Ego, and how Ego heard word of someone who held an Infinity Stone, and he just knew it was his son Peter, referring to how Peter held the Power Stone in the first Guardians of the Galaxy, which, as I mentioned before, took place not that long before Volume 2. They both take place in 2014. The next morning, Drax, Quill, and Gamora leave with Ego and his assistant Mantis, who they go to the planet Ego, Ego's planet that he made himself. Rocket stays on Bearheart with the prisoner Nebula and repairs the ship. Meanwhile, on the planet Contraxia, a snow planet that is a common hangout spot for the different Ravager clans, Yondu encounters Starhawk, head of the lead Ravager clan, and demands a seat at the table being the governing body of the Ravager clans. Starhawk mentions how Yondu broke the Ravager code by keeping Peter as a boy, and the Ravagers don't deal in children. Starhawk exiles Yondu, and just then Yondu's own Ravager clan turns against him and stages a mutiny, claiming that he is soft and he never looks out for them and only really looks out for Quill, even after Quill betrayed them. Just then, Aisha offers Yondu 1 million credits to turn over the Guardians to the Sovereign, to which Yondu agrees. Meanwhile, on Ego's ship, Gamora, Drax, and Quill realize that Mantis is an empath who can read and influence people's emotions. She uses her empathic abilities to help her master Ego sleep. This is in contrast to telepaths who can read and influence thoughts. We even get a funny scene where Mantis reveals how Quill has feelings for Gamora. So, back on Bearheart, Rocket is repairing the ship and also sets up booby traps in the forest, which the Ravagers get caught in as they attempt to capture Rocket. Rocket is brought before Yondu and the Ravagers in a clearing, and as the Ravagers are bickering over basic math about how 250,000 is not a third, it's like one of the Ravagers says, like, no, a quarter is only 25. You can't even buy a blaster with 25 units. So, Ravagers, these Ravager scenes just really some of the best scenes in the film, in my opinion. The fact that Yondu isn't going to turn over Rocket and the batteries like he was tasked to do, and Yondu's lack of leadership essentially results in a mutiny. Kraglin brings up, you never look out for us, and and then Taserface essentially takes over for Yondu, and just then, Nebula, who was let out of her handcuffs by Groot, shoots Yondu's fin, which helps him control his arrow, and agrees to help the Ravagers turn the Guardians over to Aisha. Nebula even tells Kraglin how, with her share of the profits, she will hunt down and kill her sister Gamora, and then find her adopted father Thanos and kill him as well. And then it's funny because as Kraglin's listening to all this, he's like, yeah, I was thinking like a necklace or like a pretty hat, wear a nice hat, and make all the other girls say like, ooh, that's nice. And so yeah. The other Guardians who were with Ego, they reach planet Ego, and Ego explains to them how he is a celestial being who, over time, created what he thought biological life was. He even created his own planet layer by layer, traveled throughout the cosmos, searching for other life forms in the universe, and eventually found Peter's mother, Meredith, fell in love, and he tells Peter that he is a product of that love. Peter gets to spend some one-on-one time with his father, and he realizes that he holds Ego's celestial genes. Gamora is skeptical of how there is nobody else on the planet except for them, and she confronts Peter about it. Gamora and Peter argue as Peter references the show Cheers, and Peter tells Gamora how he feels like he finally found his family, to which Gamora responds, I thought you already did. Back on the Ravager ship, Yondu and Rocket have been taken prisoner, and all of Yondu's supporters have been executed. The Ravager, Taserface, has instead taken over, and he even has his name made fun of by Rocket, and Yondu are thrown in a prison cage while Baby Groot becomes the Ravager mascot. But it's a really funny scene where Rocket, really just makes fun of Taserface's name, and as Taserface tries to rationalize, saying it's metaphorical, and then Rocket's like, metaphorical for what? It's like metaphorical for what strikes fear into the hearts of men. And, yeah. I'd say these Ravagers are probably the best characters in the film. They design Groot his own Ravager outfit, and they pour liquid on him as they chant, mascot, mascot, mascot. So, Baby Groot, sad, he walks over to Yondu and Rocket, and Yondu explains to Rocket how he broke the Ravager code by keeping Peter around, and how he and his original Ravager crew weren't that different from Rocket and his friends. Yondu tells Groot to go over to his bed and open the top drawer to get his prototype fin so that he can use his arrow again. After multiple failed attempts, Kraglin helps Groot get the arrow and apologizes to Yondu. Kraglin says how he never meant to cause a mutiny. Yondu accepts his apology and tells him to go to get the third quadrant ready for release. Yondu, Rocket, and Groot escape the cruiser the next morning with Kraglin in a fun escape sequence where Come a Little Bit Closer by Jay and the Americans plays in the background as Yondu uses his arrow and is just taking out every Ravager who betrayed him. The four of them escape as the ship sands the third quadrant, blows up. Pretty much everything. They blow up everything else except for the third quadrant. But before the rest of the ship is blown up, Taserface notifies the Sovereign of Yondu's betrayal. The four of them set a course for planet Ego in a space travel sequence that knows how goofy it is. They go through way more jump points than they ever should have at one time. And we even get a cameo from Stan Lee. Stan Lee is talking to the Watchers, who are the MCU's overlords who observe the multiverse. Actually, Uatu the Watcher was the host of Marvel's What If on Disney+. This cameo from Stan Lee explores the theory that Stan Lee could be an overlord of the MCU, who just like shows up throughout different movies. Because in this cameo, he references in this particular Stan Lee cameo, he references his cameo in Captain America Civil War, where he was a FedEx delivery man, although Captain America Civil War takes place 2 years after this film. So this explores that theory of, could Stan Lee be a cosmic entity that just exists outside of the sphere of time and space? Who knows? Rocket, Yondu, Groot, and Kraglin finally make it to Ego, and Yondu and Rocket have a moment where they realize that they aren't that different. Meanwhile, back on planet Ego, Gamora is sitting in a field where she is suddenly attacked by Nebula in a fighter jet as she attempts to kamikaze Gamora, who in the end ends up saving her life. The two of them have a moment where Nebula says how all she ever wanted was a sister. She finally bested Gamora in combat after all these years. After the two of them are back on good terms, they discover a giant cavern of bones. They make it back to the house where they were staying at, and they find Mantis, who explains how the bones are Ego's children, and Peter isn't Ego's only child. Plot twist. Once Peter realizes that he has powers, Ego taps Peter in the center of his forehead, the same place the Ancient One tapped Stephen Strange in our last film, and Peter's eyes go binoculars, and he says how he sees eternity. Eternity is a cosmic entity that has not yet been introduced in the MCU, and she was depicted on the temple art in the Temple of the Power Stone back in Volume 1. Director James Gunn has debunked the theory that Meredith Quill, Peter's mother, was a representation of eternity. So Peter unlocks his celestial abilities and even plays catch with his dad with a ball of light that he formed. Eventually, Ego explains how he had populated and mated with numerous different species throughout the universe, and none of his offspring were able to carry his celestial genes. He found Meredith Quill on Earth and had Peter, and kept Peter alive only because he carried the celestial genes. Ego explains how he and Peter are the sailor in the song Brandy, and how they have to keep sailing the seas and avoiding attachment, and how he went to Earth to see Meredith 3 times, and he couldn't come back a 4th, because if he came back a 4th time, then he never would have left. He never would have continued to explore the universe. So he's the one who put the tumor in Meredith Quill's head. He's the one who gave her the cancer. I think it was brain cancer. This effectively causes Peter to snap out of his trance as he opens fire on his father. Ego fights back, and then Yondu shows up and he kamikazes Ego, saving Quill's life. The Guardians come together as they all now realize that Ego has killed off his other offspring who didn't carry his genes, and that his goal is to cover the entire universe with his essence until everything is him. The plant that he planted in Missouri behind Dairy Queen back in 1980 erupts into a giant blob, and essentially essence of Ego, which devours numerous civilians. The same thing happens on Xandar and other planets. Mantis is about to put Ego to sleep and stop the expansion, while the rest of the Guardians literally fight planet Ego. They're joined by the Sovereign, who sent their remotely piloted fighters to take out the Guardians, which Yondu has now officially joined. Welcome to the Guardians of the Galaxy, Yondu. We get an amazing shot of Quill, Drax, Gamora, Nebula, Groot, Mantis, and Yondu all standing together as they stand their ground against Ego. Rocket and Groot plan to place a bomb inside Ego's brain, and just then Ego has the entire team pinned down. And as Yondu's being pinned down by Ego, he tells Peter, "I don't use my head to fly my arrow, boy. I use my heart." And this causes Quill to realize that the Guardians are his real family. And this pushes him to continue to fight back against his father and free his friends. We actually get like a nice sort of montage scene of like him flying him flying with a jetpack with Rocket, and just kind of fun moments that he's had with each member of the Guardians, realizing that the Guardians are his real family. So Groot sends the bomb to Ego's brain. Everyone escapes except Peter and Yondu, who stay behind. And we actually get a nice scene where Peter actually taps into those celestial, god powers, and he kind of builds a giant Pac-Man, and he really just kind of has small g god battle against his father Ego. And so, once planet Ego is essentially destroyed or is coming apart, Peter and Yondu are still there. Peter flies up out of Ego's atmosphere, being held by his surrogate father Yondu, who tells Peter how Ego may have been his father, but he wasn't his daddy. Yondu says, Ego might have been your father, but he wasn't your daddy. Yondu then gives Peter the spacesuit, which Rocket only had one left, and he sacrifices himself to save Peter, his surrogate son. The team has a funeral for Yondu, and they are joined by every Ravager faction as they each flash their colors in mourning/respect for Yondu's sacrifice, as the song Father and Son by Cat Stevens plays. The film ends with the message, "The Guardians of the Galaxy will return," followed by multiple post-credit scenes. The first scene shows Kraglin as he tries to use Yondu's Yaka arrow and accidentally stabs Drax in the arm. Another scene shows Groot as a teenager playing video games in his room with his branches going everywhere. We get a scene where the leaders of all of the Ravager factions are now brought back together following Yondu's sacrifice. This scene includes a voice cameo from Miley Cyrus. Aisha announces that she will create Adam Warlock, a rival to the Guardians in the comics, in one of her birthing pods. We will most likely see Adam Warlock in Volume 3, coming to theaters next year, 2023. The film ends with the song Guardians Inferno, an original song written by the Sneepers, playing as the credits roll, and we see each Guardian sort of dancing off to the side. We even see a cameo from the Grand Master, who will show up 2 films from now in Thor Ragnarok. The very last shot of the film is the Watchers leaving Stan Lee behind on whatever remote world that they were on. Guardians of the Galaxy Vol.2 explores the themes of family and ego. Early on in the film, we see Peter and Rocket fight over who controls the ship, and this almost kills the entire team and causes them to crash land on Bearheart. Peter thinks that he has now found his family in the form of his father Ego, who he grew up not knowing, but he then realizes that his real family is Yondu, the Ravagers, and the Guardians of the Galaxy. The battle of family versus ego is shown through Gamora and Nebula, as Nebula finally sets aside her ego and accepts Gamora as her sister. The film tells the viewers how family is not whose blood you carry or whose DNA you came from. It's who you love and who loves you. Peter realizes that his biological father, Ego, is actually evil and only accepted Peter because he held his genetics unlike the other offspring, and he used Peter to further his own agenda of covering the universe with his essence until everything is Ego. This film gives us more character development for each of the Guardians, and unfortunately killed off Yondu, who died a hero, in my opinion. We may see the Ravagers join us in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and possibly another film before then. I don't want to reveal too much. We will definitely see the Guardians of the Galaxy in future films, and Adam Warlock will be joining us in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Overall, I think that this film had a solid story, and as I said before, gave us great character development and embraced the theme of family versus ego. The only reason why I think the first one was better as a film, personally I think the first Guardians of the Galaxy was better as a film, is due to this film's pacing and how the story is split up into different pieces that all kind of just collide at the end. I'm not saying that this is a bad film, I just think that the first one had a more linear story and better pacing overall. Overall, I give this movie an 8 out of 10. I put it as an A-tier film. Let's keep the conversation going on Instagram, on TikTok, and in the comments below. Let me know what you guys thought about the film. Yeah, you can also send me a voice message. I'll do my best to actually respond to all of your comments and voice messages. Links to all my social media are in the description below. Before we go, I'd like to take a moment to formally announce my Patreon, which is where I will be uploading exclusive patron-only content in the coming weeks and months. There are 3 tiers, which I have titled Bronze, Silver, and Gold. The Bronze tier is only $1 a month, and it includes early access to these weekly Friday uploads. On the Silver tier, you will receive early access to our Friday episodes, along with access to exclusive TV show reviews that I will only be posting on Patreon, live reactions to movies, trailer reactions. I even plan to react to some YouTube compilation videos, and I plan to have guests on as well, and you'll receive all that just for $5 a month. The third and final tier is the Gold tier, which will give you access to everything included in the Bronze and Silver tiers, plus the ability to have access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content and the ability to participate in my monthly Ask Me Anything live streams exclusively on Patreon. I'll be posting like behind-the-scenes photos and videos about the equipment that I'm using. That'll be exclusively to Gold tier members, and that's only $10 a month. $10 a month. I will do my best to send each patron a personalized email and to respond to all of your questions that you guys submit both on social media and on Patreon. I want us all to be one big happy family, Cobbs Corner, me and all my listeners, I consider you guys my family, how perfect that, family was the theme of this movie. I would like to build a community behind, these films and reviewing these films. So I plan on doing our first Ask Me Anything, our first AMA live stream on Instagram. The first one will be on Instagram, and then everyone after that, I'll try to put it exclusively on Patreon. It'll be on Instagram possibly later this fall. Once I have a date and time picked out, I will let you all know, and this first live stream is open to everyone, both patrons and non-patrons. Our next film will be Spider-Man Homecoming, and it will be the first solo film for Peter Parker / Spider-Man, who we were introduced to in Captain America Civil War as he faces off against Adrian Toomes, an arms dealer who was hit hard following the Battle of New York. I'll talk to all of you in the next episode.